go next to the gentleman from California, Mr. Desaulniers. Welcome. You're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman Lynch. It's always a delight to see you in your library. I wanted to ask all of you, but start with Ambassador McFaul. And I also wanted to thank you. Some years ago, I was part of a delegation from the California State Senate, and you hosted us. It was a really remarkable conversation. I don't know if you remember it. We were there because we were engaged in conversations with the Moscow Duma, and they were interested in California, and specifically as a member from the Bay Area. In the East Bay, go Bears, sorry. They were interested, and they showed us in Moscow, the Moscow Duma, their efforts for their replication of Silicon Valley. And at that, right after that meeting, when I got into Congress, I remember being at a meeting that Aspen Institute had put on, and one of the members asked, these two comments lead to a question. A former KGB officer who had served with Mr. Putin after the first Ukrainian incident and Little Green Men, the question was, how can we believe him and his leadership when he lies? And the response from the former KGB officer was, well, he's not lying when everyone knows he's lying. So first, maybe respond to that and how we deal with it. And then the second part is, and forget my sort of sophomore insight here, having hosted the Moscow Duma and the St. Petersburg Duma, and then reciprocated, and their interest in technology and information. In hindsight, it struck me as being less about innovation and more about understanding it and using it for things that I was probably naive about at the time, and the goodwill that we were trying to convey, and hopefully a partnership. So I wonder if you respond to those two things. It's hard to trust these kind of relationships that you try to foster when the mentality is, well, it's not lying when you know they're lying.
Those are tough questions, and I'll try to be brief to get other people in. With respect to technology, it was called Skolkovo, the project you're talking about. That was their Silicon Valley idea. It was a project spearheaded by President Medvedev, not Prime Minister Putin at the time. And it was a sensible idea. Russia has more PhDs in math and physics than per capita than any country in the world. Here where I live, there's over 80,000 people that have moved from the former Soviet Union to work here in the Valley for good reason. We are attracting those people. That's what makes America strong, by the way, is to attract the best and brightest to our country. But that project's kind of withered on the vine, Congressman, because Putin doesn't believe in it. He doesn't really believe in independent economic activity. He's become very, there's been more nationalization under Putin and a shrinking of the private sector. And the second point part of your question is absolutely, we must be vigilant, not only with Russia, but with China in understanding dual use technologies and how we might be inadvertently subsidizing those that we later will face on the battlefield. And I think we need to be smart about that. And I'm glad you raised that. With respect to truth, it's important. It was always very frustrating as the US ambassador in Moscow when I was constrained by the truth and my interlocutors were not. It's very difficult to have a rational conversation with somebody who can say 2 + 2 = 5, and you have to adhere to the rules of truth that 2 + 2 = 4. And I would just underscore that to be very cautious about, there's been some news in the last 24 hours that it looks like diplomacy has a chance. And I would just be very cautious to look at the full range of what Mr. Putin's saying. Because on the one hand, he sat with his foreign minister, Lavrov, and said, well, go ahead and keep negotiating. But at the same time, he said two troubling things. His parliament did and he did. One, he said there's genocide in Donbass. If the Russian president is saying there's genocide against ethnic Russians, that sounds very ominous to me in terms of a pretext for war. And second, the parliament, the Duma there, and let's remember, it's a fully controlled organization within Putin's autocracy. They just passed a non-binding resolution calling for the independence of the two republics in Donbass. That sounds pretty scary to me, and that sounds like a very different message than we're looking for off-ramps, we're looking for diplomacy.
Dr. Kendall Taylor, maybe you could respond to briefly the intersection, as you mentioned in your earlier comments to my colleague from Florida about misinformation technology and how we have to be consistent, but the reality is not as they perceive it. Maybe
I'll
just briefly.
try to be really quick. I mean, at the point that Putin, that there is no truth, that he tries to sow conspiracy theories and create a world in which there is no truth, means that then the barrier of truth has become extremely high. And I think, we've talked about US efforts to declassify intelligence, to be more forward leaning with the intelligence that we have, so that we can try to work with allies and partners so that we can see a single truth. I think that is an effective strategy that the United States is now waking up to in order to try to cut through the lies, so that at least we among our allies have a common picture of what's happening. But the other point to highlight is, there are some significant stakes on the line. Thinking of arms control and other things, we have just 4 years left before we need a new follow-on agreement to things like New START. It is extremely difficult to negotiate these types of agreements with the Russians in an environment where Putin lies and regularly reneges on the treaties that he signs. And we are going to have to think about what an approach looks like. What are the confidence building measures that we can start, however small, so that we can build some semblance of a relationship in order to put the guardrails on the relationship that we so desperately need. And that's going to be a challenge. And that's where I think we need to do thinking, because the stakes are really high.
Thank you. I yield back. Thank you for your indulgence, Mr. Chairman, as always.